All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our second weekend of our second annual Wild Horse and Burro Virtual Summit. Um, just as a reminder, everybody is muted and your videos are turned off. That's just out of respect for our host, so that we all focus on Scott and not everybody else. If you have questions, we ask that you please put them in the chat, and we will try to get to them after Scott's presentation. I feel like Scott, you don't really need much of an introduction, but Scott is a lifelong student and admirer of horses and all equines. Um, I know that a lot of you probably have seen him on social media for his Wild Horse Wednesdays, and he is currently serves as the Chief Equine Programs Director for the Wild Animal Sanctuary, overseeing the organization's work to save and protect equines, both wild and domestic. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Scott, and thank you everyone for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, and it's an honor to be here and talking with all of you who care about our wild horses and our domestic horses, of course. As Chris said, I am a lifelong student of wild horses. I was raised with horses. My earliest childhood memories all involve horses, and they were always horses were always kind of my safe place. And whenever I needed to find peace or just to be in a space where I felt calm and at peace, I always would go out and be with our horses. And I have, I love all animals. If you've heard me talk, you've heard me say that I love them all. I love them. I love, down to the spiders and snakes. Ever since I was a little itty bitty kid, I've always loved all the animals. And over the course of my career, I have advocated for, all the species you can imagine, from whales and dolphins to, cougars and wolves and farm animals and companion animals. But the fire burns in my belly hottest for horses just because of the central role that they played in my upbringing. And so I'm very fortunate these days to be working as the Equine Programs Director for the Wild Animal Sanctuary, which owns and operates the Wild Horse Refuge. And so what I wanted to do today was talk about less of an equine focused topic, but where the horses here are still absolutely central. And what I want to talk about is how the operation of this 30,000 acre private sanctuary in northwestern Colorado is not only is it a refuge for the horses, but it is a rewilding project. And so I will go into what we're doing to make this place a refuge for the horses, but also a refuge for all of the other species that live here, and the steps that we take to make sure that this land is restored as an ecosystem so that it is thriving and healthy and able to sustain not just the horses, but all the other native wild species that call this place home. So, without further ado, let me get to my PowerPoint here. Hold on. Bear with me. Okay, here we go. And hopefully you can all see that. Okay, so this is the title of my presentation today: Rewilding the Range for Colorado's Wild Horses and Wildlife. I love this shot. This is actually was taken last year, but you're looking at what things look like right now as we speak. I'm looking out my dining room window, and I see there's snow on the ground and in the sagebrush, and I can see clear on a far ridge out there a band of probably 5 to 10 horses. But so what you see in this image here is really what it looks like right here and now. This band of horses is led by that Pinto mare in front. Her name is Desiree. And Desiree is our strongest leader here at the Wild Horse Refuge. So right now we are at about 280 Colorado-born wild horses who call the Wild Horse Refuge their home. And our whole approach here is to have these animals remain wild and free. So our philosophy and our overall approach is to interfere with their daily lives as little as possible because we want them to stay wild and we want them to live the kind of life that they had before they were rounded up and removed from their rangeland home. And I don't know what criteria the horses use to organize themselves, but I do know that and if you understand equine society, you know that they coalesce around strong leaders. Horses really do value strong leadership. And Desiree is a very strong leader. She's not particularly old. She's probably maybe 10 years old at this point. Her mother, Mingo, is also a very strong leader, and she also has a band of her own. But both Mingo and Desiree were born and grew up on the Sandwash Basin Wild Horse Herd Management Area, which is just about 30 minutes from the Wild Horse Refuge. And in fact, about two-thirds of our horses are Sandwash Basin horses. The property was acquired in January of 2023, so we're now 3 years into this project. The first horses were turned loose onto the range in July of 2023. And as I said, we make no effort to tell these horses how to organize themselves, where to go, what to do. We leave it up to them. And Desiree was sort of immediately emerged as a very strong leader, and she now has the largest band of all of the horses here at the Wild Horse Refuge. She leads a band of about 25 horses. The personalities here really run the gamut. We have some horses that are incredibly wild. They have a very low opinion of people. They want nothing to do with people. They see you coming from a mile away and they're gone. And then we have, other horses, especially younger horses, who you drive out onto the range and they come right up and they want to get all up in your business and check you out and see who you are. And so we have just a really great diversity of personalities out there. But Desiree, and our other strong leaders, you can kind of see what makes them different. They are watchful, they are cautious. And when Desiree walks up to you, she's not walking up to be friendly. She's walking up to check your papers. She's walking up to make sure that you know that she's got her eye on you. She's watching you. And all she has to do is turn and start moving away, and 25 horses fall in line single file behind her. And again, I don't know what the criteria is that makes a particular horse a strong leader, but I will say that our biggest bands are all led by mares. All of the bands, of course, have male horses, but they're all geldings because the BLM gelds wild horses when they're rounded up and brought in. But we still see, stallion behaviors. And so very often you'll see these bands with the lead mare out front, and then there will be a gelding bringing up the rear, doing the stallion thing, snaking to make sure everyone stays together. And so we see stallion behaviors. because many of these horses, they were gelded, when they were middle aged, so they had all of the stallion behaviors ingrained, and I suppose there's still testosterone coursing through their veins, and so we do see stallion behaviors, but what we don't see those really nasty, vicious fights between stallions. We see a lot of sparring, but it's pretty lighthearted. It's pretty playful. I have yet to see or what I would consider to be a serious fight. Actually, the most serious fights happen among the mares, and that's when two mares back up to each other and just start kicking. And I'm sure we've all seen that, right? So those are probably the most serious conflicts we have. But anyway, just a little bit there about the society of the horses out here at the Wild Horse Refuge. Um, so let me start this. Oh, this is just a promotional video. If I could. Oh, it's not. Oh, here we go. Hold on.
There are tales only the wild ones can tell. Of a spirit unbroken, untamed, wild, free. At home in the most rugged terrain, knowing no boundary. Where speed and strength and room to run are the only things that matter. Oh, the spirit of the wild boils hot in these veins. Yet it seems as the world gets a bit more crowded, a bit more busy, a bit more covered in concrete and fence, there seems to be less and less wilderness for these wild ones. The ones who call Colorado's roughest spaces home. And so they found their freedom fenced up, hemmed in by bars, rounded up and corralled, their spirit bound tight by no choice of their own. Until today. This, a wild, wild space for the wildest and most free spirits on this earth. Every inch, every acre, every mile, untamed, unfenced, untouched, theirs alone. Moving as the wind guides them, following instinctive paths carved through these canyons and grasslands thousands of years old. Stretching far to the horizon, a place to reclaim their birthright and regain their freedom. It's time for them to regain their freedom.
So that obviously is a little bit obsolete because it said 22,500 acres, which was the size of the original working cattle ranch that this place used to be. It was a cattle ranch going all the way back to the original homestead days. And the early part of this year, we acquired an additional 7,000 acres. So we're now at 30,000 acres. But the Wild Animal Sanctuary was founded by Pat Craig over 40 years ago. Pat took an interest in the plight of captive exotic wildlife, especially big cats. And he wanted to try a whole new approach to sanctuary so that instead of these animals getting rescued out of, terrible situations, instead of just putting them into another cage, he wanted to provide them with actual habitat. And so his approach has been to go into situations often involving law enforcement where, these animals are being held in substandard conditions. And he gets those animals and brings them to Colorado and provides them not just with another enclosure, but with actual habitat. And that's been his approach. No one else does it. He and a colleague of mine left yesterday for Nepal. This is interesting. The government of Nepal, they have tigers in Nepal, and the law in Nepal says that you cannot kill a tiger for any reason. And so whenever there is a man-eater, whenever there is a tiger who is attacking people, the government of Nepal captures those tigers and has just been holding them in cages. And they reached out to Pat and said, "We have a large piece of property. We want you to help us build a sanctuary for all of these tigers that we've had to go out and capture." And so, Pat has a worldwide reputation as an expert in these species, and also in how to provide them with, not just a cage, but actual habitat. And so that's been his approach for over 40 years. If you want to learn more about the organization, go to wildanimalsanctuary.org. So the mission is basically to address the captive wild animal crisis by providing them with habitat. So now we are at, I think that number is closer to 1,450 lions, tigers, bears, wolves, mustangs, and other wild animals that have all been taken out of bad situations and are now living in a habitat setting. This makes it the largest animal sanctuary in the world, both in terms of the number of animals as well as the scale of the operation. We've got 3 facilities. We've got the 1,200-acre wild animal sanctuary, which is also the name of the 501c3. That is located in Keansburg outside of Denver. Then there's a 10,000-acre refuge in southeastern Colorado that is home to large carnivores and wild horses from other states. And then, of course, we have the Wild Horse Refuge at 30,000 acres. And the Wild Horse Refuge is the newest of the 3 facilities. So this is the facility in Keansburg. And this is really our only public-facing facility. So you go there, you buy a ticket, there's shops, there's cafes, restaurants, but then there is this elevated 1.5-mile long walkway where you walk along above the habitats to observe these large carnivores in a habitat setting. It's a remarkable experience, and if you're ever in Denver, I highly recommend going to visit the Wild Animal Sanctuary because, and the thing about the elevated platform is that it is non-disruptive to the animals. If you were down there at eye level with them, they would spend all of their time, watching and making sure what's going on with people looking at them at ground level. But if you're up above them, they don't even notice, and so they go about their business. You'll see bears frolicking in their swimming pools. You'll see, lions and tigers, roaming across, these vast areas. It's quite a facility. And then this is the second facility, the Wild Animal Refuge down in southeastern Colorado outside of Springfield. So if you picture a large box, 10,000 acres, that is the facility. Inside that box, a smaller box of 2,500 acres. That 2,500 acres is all habitat for large carnivores. So, Joe Exotics, the Tiger King's tigers are there. There's a pride of lions from a zoo in Ukraine that was rescued. Bears, wolves, but all of these animals have, large enclosures of up to 100 acres. So lots of room for them to roam. And that's the 2,500 acres. The 7,500 acres outside of that is all dedicated to wild horses that have been rescued from other states. So the Wild Horse Refuge here in northwestern Colorado is for Colorado-born wild horses only. The Wild Animal Refuge is for wild horses that have been rescued from other states. But this is actually the scene when the first 80 horses were turned loose at here at the Wild Horse Refuge. And you'll see we have an abundance of gray horses. That's because, again, many of our horses come from the Sandwash Basin, and gray is a very common color of horses, of horse at Sandwash Basin. So we like to say we have the bays and grays for days. We have the grays from Sandwash Basin, and we have a lot of bays from the Piceance East Douglas herd management area here in Colorado. Let me see. Let me look at this. Yeah, so this just shows you the horses as they're being turned out. And I got to say that this is one of the greatest parts about this work is those moments when these animals are released. And I'm talking about the wild horses, but I'm also talking about, all of those big cats and bears and so forth. Many of these animals, like many of these horses, were standing in short-term holding corrals for years, for years. Some of these wild horses were in BLM corrals, and you just figure that many of them had kind of lost hope. And so when you get to that moment when they're turned out onto this range, and you can just see their brains just popping because they're like, is this really happening? And when they realize that they can literally run as far as they want to run, as fast as they want to run, and go anywhere they want, those are the moments that you live for here. And on these other facilities, these big cats, many of these big cats have known only concrete and bars, terrible. And so now you see them and they get turned out, and there's blue sky and there's grass and there's no bars. There's just as far as they want to go. And just to see these animals, the moment when they realize that their lives are about to fundamentally change in a really big and really good way, it's pretty good stuff. So let's see. So what is the Wild Horse Refuge? We specialize in rescuing Colorado-born wild Mustangs in order to restore and maintain their free and wild spirit. Our mission is to virtually rewild both Colorado-born and non-Colorado-born wild horses by releasing them into vast open spaces. The Wild Horse Refuge, of course, takes the Colorado horses, and the Wild Animal Refuge takes non-Colorado horses. So where do these horses come from? Most of our horses we get directly from the Bureau of Land Management. So we go to the BLM's wild horse adoption events, and horses that don't get adopted, we adopt and we bring them to the Wild Horse Refuge. We are especially concerned with those sale authority horses, those also known as the three strikes horses. Those are horses that have been put up for adoption at least 3 times and have been passed over or are 10 years or older, because the BLM can sell those horses for $25 a piece. And you get your title immediately. It's not like adoption where you have to wait a year to get your title. So those are the horses that are most at risk of falling into the wrong hands, those sale authority horses. So we go and we make sure that we get those sale authority horses and bring them here. So because many of those sale authority horses are middle-aged to older, a substantial portion of our horses here are middle-aged to older horses. But we also have some young ones that we've adopted. So again, it kind of runs the gamut. What happened was after the Sandwash Basin Roundup in 2021, I mean, that was a very controversial roundup, a lot of public opposition to it. The governor opposed it. Members of Congress here in Colorado opposed it. And so when Pat saw that roundup, he realized that he needed to find a place for unadopted Colorado wild horses to live out their lives. So he began looking for suitable properties, and in 2023 found this remarkable piece of property. It's now at 30,000 acres. We have 14 wells, and we have water holes that stay full of water year round, even during drought conditions like we had last year, in which, judging from the how things are going, I think we're going to have another really dry year. But this is something that the animals never have to worry about, is having to travel far for water. But again, we are only 30 miles east of the Sandwash Basin. So for many of these horses, this feels very much like their home and where they grew up. So that big green area is the Sandwash Basin, and that little red star is where the wild horse refuge is. So you can see how close we are to that. So in January 2023, closed on the original 23,000 acres, and then by that year, the horses were turned loose, and we're now at about 280 wild horses. At the Wild Horse Refuge, we are committed to protecting the horses, the wildlife, and the habitat that they all depend on. And so when we talk about rewilding, I mean, I know we probably all heard about rewilding projects, and it's obviously very worthy. It's a very positive thing. But what constitutes rewilding? Rewilding is a conservation strategy that seeks to restore an ecosystem to its natural state of robust health and balance, with all native species present and playing their role. So being responsible stewards of this 30,000 acres is a top priority. We want to make sure that we are protecting the plant life, the animal life, keep the water sources going so that all of these animals are sustained. And what we do is we have professional range experts come to the Wild Horse Refuge every year and do a top to bottom assessment so that we can make sure that areas aren't being overgrazed, that the grass is growing, the range is thriving, and there's plenty to go around for all of the animals that call this place home. And so, what we are showing with this project is that horses are absolutely vital to the sagebrush steppe ecosystem here at the Wild Horse Refuge. The horses are vital to keeping the range healthy. They disperse grass seeds in their manure. They consume the flammable wildfire fuels, and the horses serve as a form of protection for other species, especially pronghorn. And if you go out into, and this is not just here, but I've visited many other wild horse herds, and pronghorn seek out the company of wild horses. And why is that? Because horses are taller and they have a better sense of sight and hearing. And so basically you'll see pronghorn bedded down around grazing horses. And the minute the horses all look up to spot danger, the pronghorn immediately stand up and move away. So it's very interesting how there's sort of this symbiotic relationship among these species. Again, we only have, there's no reproduction that goes on here. We have, all of the male horses have been gelded. That there is Michelangelo. He's our celebrity horse, the guy on the left. He is the grandson of Picasso. So, a lot of people who know about Sandwash Basin and Picasso, that great, amazing, legendary stallion who lived his entire life wild and free at Sandwash Basin. Michelangelo is his grandson. So a lot of people who know that herd will come here, and they, of course, want to meet Michelangelo because he's kind of a rock star. but we don't have reproduction here. And that's very important because every horse born would mean one less horse that we could get out of holding and bring to the refuge. So that's, and again, these horses are here to stay. They will live out their lives. We have, older horses. So as they gradually live out their lives and die off, that will create opportunity to bring in more. So our horses are very fortunate to eat only abundant bunch grasses, both native bunch grasses, but also there is a non-native bunch grass that was brought here by the first settlers called it's crested wheat grass. It's basically just a variant of wheat, but it's very nutritious for the animals. It's not native to this area, but it coexists beautifully with the native bunch grasses. So what does that mean? It means that we don't have cheatgrass. Cheatgrass is that really aggressive species of grass that's invasive, that takes advantage of areas that are overgrazed, especially by commercial livestock. It's extremely flammable. Its nutritional value is very low. So we don't have cheatgrass here at the Wild Horse Refuge. We have abundant bunch grasses, and it provides great forage, not just for the wild horses, but for all the other species here. Even during the dry season, we have abundant water. There's Michelangelo with his band. He's the guy on the left. But we like to say that these horses have the very same kind of life they had when they were still out on public lands, but it's actually a much easier life in that they don't have to travel far for water. Even during the winter, there is tons of grass to be found. And we do have hay. We have large hay fields where we grow our own hay. And if the snow gets so deep that it impairs the ability of the horses to forage and move around, we will take hay out to them. We didn't have to do that this year, judging from the lack of snowfall. We might not have to do it this year, but we do have hay available. But for the most part, the horses have, constant, easy access to food and water. But of course, the Wild Horse Refuge is home to more than just horses. And one of the really great things about this place is that every time you go out there, you're going to see all kinds of wildlife. We have elk that live here. We have elk that migrate through here. We have bald eagles, golden eagles, and of course we have badgers. And why do we have badgers? Well, because we have a lot of ground-dwelling rodents like prairie dogs and ground squirrels. We have golden eagles. We have actually more. The golden eagles stay here year-round. The bald eagles migrate and spend the winter here and then leave in the spring. With the chicks that they've raised. The golden eagles are absolutely monsters. They are huge. And when you see these guys like just standing on the ground, like sometimes you'll see them at the water holes drinking water, they stand this tall. They're huge. But we have jackrabbits, or as my dog Atticus likes to call them, friend bunnies. He thinks that he's kind of getting older and arthritic, and so when he sees a jackrabbit, he doesn't chase it. He's just like, "Hey, there goes friend bunny." We have lots of jackrabbits. We have coyotes. We wish we had more coyotes because we need more help in keeping the ground-dwelling rodents under control. But we love them all. We have there's some prairie dogs on the left there in the middle. We have lots of prairie dogs, and I love prairie dogs. They are a keystone species. They are an ecosystem engineer. They provide habitat for all different kinds of animals, and they also provide food for all of the predators on the refuge. In terms of large carnivores, we do have we have mountain lions, we have bobcats, we have coyotes, we have badgers, we have weasels. A lot of one of the questions we get is do we have any problem with mountain lions going after the horses? And the answer is no. We have yet to lose a single horse to any kind of carnivore. And why is that? Well, number one, we don't have foals. and foals would be more likely to attract the predators. But also they have a whole menu of easier prey from elk and mule deer down to jackrabbits and prairie dogs and ground squirrels. There is a lot to choose from before they try and take on a 1,000-pound middle-aged wild Mustang. We have had individual wolves move through the refuge. We will get a call from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and they'll just say, "Hey, we're just tracking one of our wolves, and they're on your property, and we're just letting you know." It's not been a problem. Individual wolves do not pose a threat to these horses. In fact, I think, given how tightly knit these horses are, if they got wind of a lone wolf, they would probably hunt it down and try and destroy it. A pack of wolves would be a different situation, but so far, we're not really in the vicinity of any packs. You will often find, a deer that's been taken down by, something. And of course, the eagles and the coyotes and everyone, they help us with the jackrabbits and the prairie dogs and ground squirrels and all those kinds of things. We have lots of pronghorn. We have, ravens. There's a bobcat. I'll see bobcat tracks around the house here all the time because there's tons of mice and stuff that live in the grass out here. But look at that bird. We need to talk about that bird. That is a greater sage grouse. The greater sage grouse, which is the size of a large chicken, and I mean a large chicken, is dwindling across its historic range across 11 western states. It depends on a healthy sagebrush steppe habitat in order to survive. And the numbers of greater sage grouse have been dwindling across its range, primarily due to industrial uses of our public lands, especially livestock grazing, but also mining and energy extraction and all that kind of stuff. All of that disrupts sage grouse. But here at the Wild Horse Refuge, we have so many sage grouse, you sometimes have to shoo them out of the way. We had a mother sage grouse raise her chicks under my front porch last summer. We thought that was just about the best thing ever. And we have the largest breeding lek, which is the territory that sage grouse return to every year to do their courtship displays, like this fellow here in this image. And I went out late spring, early morning last year, and was amazed to find at least 300 sage grouse. The hens were all in a circle, a great big circle. In the middle were all the boys, the male sage grouse, and the male sage grouse were all doing their things, their bags pumping and their tails found up like little turkeys and doing their strutting thing. And the hens are all outside watching and, trying to decide, who they want to meet up with and take home with them. And, here's the thing. Wild horses get blamed for a lot of things. We've all heard it. It comes from industry, it comes from government agencies that wild horses destroy habitat. There's even, wild horses, have been blamed for, declines in sage grouse populations. Forget for a moment that, wild horses are outnumbered dozens or even hundreds to one by commercial livestock. It's just a convenient narrative to serve as a pretext for getting rid of wild horses, to say that they are a cause of sage grouse decline, totally deflecting from the real cause of sage grouse decline and instead focusing on a useful scapegoat, namely the wild horse. What are we showing here at the Wild Horse Refuge? We're showing that wild horses and sage grouse thrive together. Here we are, just short of 300 horses, and we've got the largest breeding lek sage grouse in the state of Colorado. And, uh, you know, the sage grouse population grew by a third over the past year. It grew by 42% over 2 years ago. So even as we have been adding horses to this ecosystem, the sage grouse continue to multiply and the population grows. And of course, what is great is that these sage grouse will disperse from here and help the population grow, outside of the refuge. So, this narrative that we hear about wild horses causing harm to ecosystem, and they've even been called the bullies of the range, being accused of bullying these other species. I can tell you, if you came here to the Wild Horse Refuge, what you will see is wild horses and all of these species happily coexisting. It's a mind-blowing thing to go out early in the morning and see a mixed herd of mustangs, mule deer, and pronghorn all grazing peacefully together, see pronghorns and mustangs galloping together across a hillside just for the sheer joy of running. It's something, that a message that I really like to spread, that the Wild Horse Refuge shows how wild horses aren't just, a helpful member of the community here, but they are actually important to the community. They're important to plant life. They're important to the other wild species. And, so we have all this. We have all these horses, all these sage grouse, all these mule deer, all these species. What don't we have? We don't have cattle and sheep. There's no cattle and sheep here. And so what you see is, with that element missing, everyone gets along great. The grass grows, the range thrives. It's amazing. So again, as a rewilding project, this is really what we're all about. We want to keep this ecosystem. We want to restore it to its original state with all of the native species. And we want that ecosystem to include wild equines. And just remember, anytime anyone says that, oh, these wild horses are non-native and they're invasive and they don't belong here. Well, this is their home turf. They started evolving right here in North America over 55 million years ago. And you turn cattle and sheep out onto this ecosystem, and they have to be intensively managed. You have to provide them food. You have to provide them water. You have to kill all the predators because they can't defend themselves. And so to have, commercial livestock, you have to do actual ranching stuff. But you take a horse and you turn it out into this ecosystem, and it thrives, and it doesn't need to be managed. Because this is the ecosystem that it evolved in. And you come out here and you see these animals out there on the range thriving, being part of the ecosystem, and you realize, this is an animal that absolutely belongs here. This is a species that belongs here. And that's why they do so well, because this is what they were built for. Anyway, we are a nonprofit, and here comes the little plug. Please consider becoming a founder. How do you become a founder? You contribute the equivalent of the purchase price of 1 acre of land, which is $777. When you become a founder, that entitles you to VIP tours of the sanctuary. We have a Founders Day every September where everyone who's been a founder comes together, goes out, sees the horses, talks to each other. It's just it's a great event that brings together supporters to kind of, create that community and enjoy the experience of the Wild Horse Refuge. So, if you want to learn more about us, there's the websites. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Scott. That was great. So we do have a couple questions. You have mountain lions and wolves. You did talk about that. So I think the question went in before you talked about it. Is there a known limit to the number of horses the refuge can support?
There is definitely a limit. We just don't know what it is yet. And so that's why, we have these experts come out and look at the range to make sure that we're not overgrazing it. When those experts tell us, okay, you're probably at capacity, then at that point we'll stop taking horses, but we haven't reached it yet. 30,000 acres. I mean, that's literally horizon to horizon as far as you can see. So there is a lot of space, and again, you know uh, we want to make sure that we are not adding horses to the detriment of the landscape or those other species. So we are being very careful about it. We take our responsibility to the ecosystem very seriously. So there is a number. We don't know what it is yet. We're not there yet. But when we get there, then at that point, we will stay with the number that we're at.
Do you have any rescued burros or donkeys at the refuge?
We have donkeys down at the Wild Animal Refuge down in southeastern Colorado, but because this is for only Colorado-born wild horses, there are no wild burro HMAs in Colorado, so we have only horses here.
What is the reason for having two different sanctuaries for Colorado horses and for horses from other places?
That was just part of the mission of when Pat Craig was setting up these facilities. He wanted, because of the proximity to Sand Wash Basin, he wanted, and the fact that most of the wild horses in Colorado live sort of in this western part of the state. He really wanted this to be a place for horses where they would feel at home, where they are already adapted to the climate and the topography and everything else. The conditions down at the southeastern Colorado facility are not quite this. They can get pretty harsh. I mean, very, very cold, and so for horses that are not acclimated to this kind of environment, the facility down in southeastern Colorado is better. And it's just, I think part of the mission is to make sure that we don't overburden the land with too many horses. And if we opened it up to horses from all the states, then, we would very quickly be at capacity, and we want to be careful that we don't, that we're careful about that. And again, we want to make sure that, for Colorado anyway, there's a place for wild horses to go and live out their lives if they're not adopted.
So then do you have a good working relationship with the Bureau of Land Management and with the Wild Horse Working Group in Colorado?
We do. Our number one volunteer is Cindy Wright. She's with Wild Horse Warriors. She's the only licensed tour operator. She gives tours out at the Sand Wash Basin. And so I attended most of the working group meetings, and it was a very rewarding experience to listen in on those conversations about the future of wild horse management in Colorado. We do have a good relationship with the BLM, and because we rely on their willingness to let us take those horses that don't get adopted. So yeah, we maintain a good working relationship with the BLM.
Has that decreased the number of Colorado horses then that are in holding?
Yes, I mean, obviously, and we're in a bit of a state of flux because they closed the holding facility at Canyon City, and we took 30 horses that were sort of left over. They had 100 horses that they needed immediate adoption for. We took 30 of those horses. And it's, we're in a very uncertain time right now, uh, with respect to funding. There are all sorts of questions about the future of BLM's funding for all of its operations, not just wild horses and burros, but for everything that the BLM does. So, we're in kind of this interesting period where we don't know what the funding will be for the BLM and what their capacity will be. We know that, they do intend to conduct roundups here in Colorado, especially of the Piance East Douglas horses, which is, just they live down by outside of Meeker, which is 45 minutes south of here, and they will need a place for those horses to go. I've talked to the BLM and continue to talk to them about, as they get down to their AML, which is the number that they have established as the appropriate management level, that they will then pivot and start doing what are called maintenance gathers, where they are targeting, just a smaller portion of horses to keep the herds at that AML. They would target horses that are more easily adoptable, especially younger ones. And then when they do those gathers, the mares are treated with fertility control. And, so that, instead of these sort of like where you have entire herds being, trapped and removed, it's done in a more surgical and a more targeted way, so that so that you leave the older horses out there on the range, and the younger horses are the ones that are targeted for removal because they're the ones that are the most adoptable.
Um, you had mentioned earlier that usually the mares are leading the bands around, which is, I mean, that happens, I think, like in the wild too, sometimes, like you'll
Yeah,
see the mares leading. But do you
right.
think you notice a difference in behavior with the stallions being gelded, aside from like
No,
less fighting, like you had said?
no, not really. They still the geldings still do, and we have some geldings that are very, very strong. They have that sort of that stallion presence. So even though they can't make babies, they still act very much like wild stallions. The social dynamics really don't change, that we've been able to see. We see that the mares are the ones who tend to make the decisions for the bands. The stallions are the ones who bring up the rear. Um, we, you know, I would say we don't have mating behaviors, except that there is this one guy. So there's a band called the Naughty Nine, and they are all young male horses. And we call them the Naughty Nine because they act like irresponsible hooligans. You'll see a nice, quiet band of, middle-aged horses enjoying the afternoon, dozing or grazing, and then over the ridge come the Naughty Nines, and they just go in and they harass everyone and they run around, and like I said, they act like irresponsible hooligans. Well, one of those guys, he didn't get the memo that he's a gelding. And so I have observed him mating with mares, and not just trying to mate with mares, but he's not making babies. So something there, and so he's, 2/3 of our horses are mares. So he's a fairly popular guy. But other than other than him, you don't see any attempts at mating or breeding. And again, when the stallions do get together, it's lighthearted sparring, and there's one group that's led by a big Sandwash Basin Palomino guy named Kalua. And he's the leader of that band. And then there's a black Mustang named Punky, and Punky's half the size of Kalua. And Punky is always picking on Kalua until Kalua finally loses his patience, and then, Punky gets what he wants, which is a little sparring bout, and then Kahlua chases Punky away, and then Punky comes back and picks another fight with Kahlua, and so you see a lot of that kind of nonsense, and it's really fun to watch. But I mean, when you see the video of some of these fights that happen now on public lands with the wild herds, they're pretty brutal, and those horses, get pretty beat up, and we just don't have that here. But otherwise, I mean, everyone gets along, and I would say that the band dynamics are largely the same, except obviously there aren't any foals. Um, so that's hopefully that answers that question.
All right. If the BLM's plan to remove the young horses, gelded the stallions, and give fertility control to older mares, then essentially it appears they're maneuvering to zero out the herd.
No, I don't think they don't geld the stallions. They would treat the mares with fertility control, but even if you treat every single mare in a herd with fertility control, that fertility control is going to only remain in effect for a year or two, and then the mare has to be retreated. And some mares, a small number of mares, even though they are treated, will still get pregnant. So there will still be foals. All it's doing is really slowing the growth of those herds. And I know, there's concern about, will these herds eventually die out? In my many conversations that I've had with BLM people here, and I believe them when they say that, their job is to manage the wild horses. They want horses to remain out on our public lands, but they have a multi-use mandate. So they have to allow livestock grazing. They have to allow mining. They have to allow recreational vehicles, all of the things. And so, what they will say is they're trying to maintain a balance where, we still have wild horses, but their population isn't growing to such an extent that all of those other uses are sort of crowded out. So, I've been an advocate for wild horses, as everyone knows, for many, many years. This has been a different experience in terms of getting to know the BLM people. And I will also say, I can only speak to the BLM people here in Colorado. But I would say that they understand that wild horses are very popular with Coloradoans. They understand that Colorado as a state wants wild horses. And so I think that they, understanding that political reality, they want to play ball, and they want to be part of the conversation with the working group and with the governor's office and everyone else, so that, there is a new approach to managing wild horses in Colorado. The Colorado legislature has passed two bills that basically represent the state of Colorado stepping up and saying, we want to help the BLM do a better job of managing wild horses. And so with a larger state presence in the management scheme, the BLM, is part of that. And so, again, I can't speak to the political reality in the other states. I mean, I have a good sense of what the reality is, but I can tell you here in Colorado, the BLM has an interest in making sure that the wild horses are always here.
So I have a question for you on that note. How can we as advocates in other places start working on that new path forward? That's something, for the last 4 years, we've been fighting so hard for the Theodore Roosevelt horses. Now we finally have a new superintendent, and she is told me that she is committed to a positive path forward. Because I said to her, like, I don't want to keep fighting, right? Like, I don't want to be this person. How do we work together so that, we're working together and not working against each other? And that's something that happened with the Wild Horse Working Group in Colorado. I know a lot of people will say, red states, our legislators don't listen. And I will say, North Dakota, red state, we made our legislators listen. So I think that that's also part of it. But I don't know if you have any other thoughts or things like that, positive things that advocates can do to try something different.
That's a really great question, Chris. And I mean, if we had the next 3 weeks to have this conversation, we might be able to get around to an answer. But Colorado is a very pro horse and very pro animal state. And so it's hopefully what we're doing here in Colorado is creating a model between the Colorado Wild Horse Working Group, the BLM, being part of the solution, having, this kind of facility here like the Wild Horse Refuge. If this is held up as a model to be replicated, um, the way that Colorado is approaching it, so that it's not just, trying to drive numbers down as low as possible, and the only legitimate stakeholders that are recognized is the livestock industry and other industries. Um, you know, that's really what I think we are trying to do here. We are trying to create a model in Colorado that we hope other states will replicate. And the political realities in Wyoming are very, very different. The political realities in Nevada are very, very different. Half of the wild horse population lives in Nevada. So that puts, the wild horse issue on a completely different level. But if there was a place like this in every state that had a wild horse population, it at least provides a place for horses that are put up for adoption, not adopted, to go and live out their lives. And these horses they're not costing the taxpayers anything. And, the BLM has estimated that it costs $50,000 to care for an unadopted wild horse after it's, removed. So you do the math, we're saving the taxpayers millions of dollars. And that's something that really appeals to red state lawmakers when they hear that taxpayers aren't having to pay for the care of these horses because they're on a private sanctuary. Their ears perk up and they're like, that's great. I mean, I've had, many meetings with members of Congress since I've been working here, just telling them about this place. And the Republicans get more excited than the Democrats because they love the idea that there's a win-win solution that isn't costing the taxpayers more money, that doesn't generate the controversy, of horses in holding. It's a win for the wild horses. It's a win for the government, and it's a win for the taxpayers. So that's a very long answer, but I think what we're trying to do, we meaning everyone here in Colorado who cares about wild horses, is to create a working model that hopefully other states can follow.
So let me ask you this, because I don't know this. I only know like the National Park Service because that's what we deal with. But would you encourage people to have a relationship with their local BLM offices?
Absolutely. I mean, just as we advocates sometimes create this stereotype of, government officials in our minds, I think that, many people in those government agencies also create stereotypes of people who care about wild horses. And I think that breaking down those stereotypes and creating conversations is very, very important. So having a respectful conversation with BLM officials and letting them know that there are people that care about wild horses, but that also understand the mandate that the BLM is operating under, and all of the different interests that the BLM has to constantly be balancing and juggling. Being a friendly voice instead of someone, screaming or accusing or whatever, I think is very helpful. And I know, Kim, you've experienced that with the Park Service. And yeah, I mean, we've had the BLM out here to the Wild Horse Refuge. We've had some amazing conversations with them. They love what we're doing. And so, I would love to see that kind of thing happen in other states as well.
I think it could go a long way to help getting some transparency and understanding, like you said. We just want the horses to be there, but sometimes we don't understand that it's multi-use land that has to accommodate everybody else too. So I think that that's a good
Yeah,
point. I think there's just a couple more questions if you have a few minutes.
sure.
Wild horse AML was established as a number nationally that the NCBA could live with. It does not use any science to determine that number or horses that any HMA can support. Do you have any comments on that?
You're preaching to the choir.
Um,
I mean, when the National Academy of Sciences did their full report in 2013 on the BLM's wild horse and burro program, that was one of the threshold issues they identified, is that there is no scientific basis for AML, and it is basically was a number that was contrived that the other users of the land could live with. But I also know that, over my many years of talking about AML, the government is pretty entrenched on the AML, and I almost think it would take, an amendment to the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act to get the AML adjusted. But the paradigm that we have right now, the system that we have right now, they're pretty set on those AML numbers, and barring something really drastic, I think those are the numbers we're stuck with.
do you have any idea what was the outcome of the dispute or whatever you want to call it when the governor intervened in Colorado? This person says, I remember there was a holding facility where the horses were dying from some unknown disease. Do you know what happened there?
The holding facility in Canyon City in 2023 suffered an outbreak of equine influenza that killed about 145 horses. And it was a result of, most of the horses were from the West Douglas herd. And the BLM says that those horses were already compromised because there were a lot of wildfires when they were gathered. And so those horses may have been predisposed to respiratory problems, which is what the equine influenza virus does. It attacks the horse's respiratory system. But, I mean, those horses should have been vaccinated as soon as they arrived at Canyon City, and they weren't. And 145 horses died, and it was really awful. Governor Polis has been a real champion for wild horses during the 2021 roundup of the Sandwash Basin. Horses, he intervened and tried to get the BLM to hold off. Joe Neguse, a member of Congress here in Colorado, also intervened, and the BLM proceeded with that roundup, in spite of those efforts by those leaders. They ended up rounding up, I think, over 100 horses less than what they said they were going to. And I think many believed that was a concession that was made to those leaders who spoke up. But that's one of the things that we have here in Colorado that other states don't have, and that is a governor who loves animals and who is passionate about, the welfare of wild horses in Colorado. And his term is going to end soon, and it'll be very interesting to see how that reality changes when we get a new governor who may not have that same level of passion. It'll be interesting to see.
All right. Anybody else have any questions before we let Scott go? Did the horses that were at Canyon City when the federal government defunded the inmate program find homes in Colorado?
No, there were, I want to say, 2,000 horses in holding when they made that decision in Canyon City. Don't hold me to that number, but I think it was something like that. Most of those horses were sent to out-of-state holding facilities and long-term holding. Then there were those 100 horses that were sort of left. They were the horses that had arrived most recently. And about 70 of those horses found really good homes. And the BLM actually created this sort of innovative foster program where these horses were, some of them were put into foster homes. And then, efforts will be made to find permanent homes for them. And then, the 30 that were basically left over that they weren't able to place, came here to the Wild Horse Refuge.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott. We appreciate it as always. And it was really a great presentation. And
Thank you.
thank you again. And thank you for all you do.
I appreciate it, Chris. Take care, everyone. Oh, and by the way, feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions. I'm at scott.beckstead@wildanimalsanctuary.org.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.